And as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Make sure to hit that like button and share this video on the platform that you're viewing from. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela continues the study of the 2022 political report to the third plenary of the party's 7th Congress, titled Relentless, 50 Years of Leadership Towards African Redemption. The study materials have been linked in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions. For the first hour, the chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we'll open it up to you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Director Akile. I am trying to start my video now. Unsuccessful. The host has asked me to do it, and I keep trying to do it. There, thank you. I want to thank you for the introduction and to welcome everybody to this discussion of the political report to the 3rd plenary of our 7th Congress. And just to remind everybody that this plenary process that the African People's Socialist Party goes through, we do this plenary something like annually, once a year between Congresses. And we do this to sum up, to see where we are, to see how we have been successful in completing the tasks, the mandates, the resolutions that have come from our Congress, to see how the world has changed and what might be necessary in terms of changes and advancements from the party itself. And it allows for a part of a process of a political report. The political report, of course, that the main resolution for the actual Congress itself was done for our 7th Congress. And subsequently, I do a political report to sum up where we are, to try to give some assessment of what's happening in the world in terms of advancing our struggle for our liberation, for the redemption of our Africa, for the redemption of Black people globally. And this is a part of the process that we're looking at. And today, we're going to be discussing the crisis of this whole social system, which is really important for us to understand because it is in a state of critical existence now. And it is able to sum this up that helps us to recognize the significant role that we are playing at this moment in history. It helps us, it should enable us to have a tremendous amount of confidence in terms of our potential for victory. it lets us know that that this moment is a really important moment for advancing to struggle, that the whole rotten, filthy social system that has come about as a consequence of stealing our freedom, our future, for attempting to rob us of our future, that this system is in a serious state of distress that we not only are happy to see, but that we contribute to that we continue to contribute to deepen the distress, to deepen the crisis of the social system. And when we understand this crisis, as we will be discussing it today, it gives us great confidence, which is African internationalism as an expression of as our worldview. It gives us great confidence in the defeat of our oppressor and the changing world that we are initiating and that we are competently preparing to initiate as a revolutionary party. So I wanted to just say that this is a really important chapter that we are about to look at now. This is chapter 3. And the title of this chapter of the political report to the third plenary of the 7th Congress, political report that is characterized as relentless, 50 years of leadership toward African redemption. And that is a title that responds to the fact that this coming year, this year is the 50th anniversary of the founding of the African People's Socialist Party. So I will begin. Chapter 3, the crisis of imperialism. As I wrote in 2013 in my political report to the 6th Party Congress, quote, "Today there is an uneasy equilibrium between the past and the future, and much anxiety abounds throughout the world. Every individual, every social force that perceives this future attached to the existing imperialist social system is experiencing severe distress," unquote. I call the party's 6th Congress the, quote, "metaphorical mountaintop from which we can see the future of our Africa and our people liberated and united, propelling all oppressed humanity, all the workers and toiling masses of the world into a future of peace, prosperity, and eternal social justice," unquote. Since our party's first Congress in 1981, I have always summed up the deepening crisis of imperialism in every political report. Our party has relentlessly worked to deepen imperialism's crisis with every passing year over the past half century, as we tirelessly pursued African redemption and self-government. We are determined here, we are reminded here that we are not having a new discussion. We are only discussing how the crisis of imperialism reveals itself to us at this moment, a snapshot in rapidly evolving history. Indeed, this is one role of our plenaries. They help us to sum up where we are in our 5-year plan provided by our Congress. Where are we in carrying out our mandates and resolutions? How is our work affected by evolving circumstances that make building our party ever more urgent? Our party's African internationalism recognizes the existence of this permanent crisis. The party's regional strategy and ongoing work to occupy all the political space within the African world provide the colonized of the earth the ability to strike out against colonialism in a coordinated way from a single center. The US, a troubled hegemon, faces existential crisis from an assortment of contradictions. Even the continuation of US economic quarantine of Afghanistan, with its starvation from afar and slander, cannot erase from public consciousness the humiliating defeat of the mighty US by impoverished anti-colonial Afghani fighters. And they do continue to slander the Afghani revolution, the Afghani people, after being beaten on the ground, after proving that Malcolm X and Maxim was absolutely correct, that the white man cannot win another war on the ground. And so what they've done, they've resorted to is starvation. By being able, with this connection to this shakily existing Western powers, they control the economies of the world, the banks and the various critical financial institutions, and they're depriving the Afghani people of the monies that they need. That's their money. That is to say, the Afghani people's money that's in these Western colonially controlled banks. And so they will starve the people into submission by declaring that the Afghani people don't treat women well enough, that they're better under the bombs of the US and NATO forces, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that the Afghani people did defeat the US military force. And after more than 20 years of occupation, the US was unable to bring the people down, to put them in a permanent state of humiliating subjugation. The US has also been unable to overturn the Iranian Republic or return that country to the vassalist status it initiated there after overthrowing its elected leader in 1953. Nor has the US been able to consolidate power in Iraq as part of its grand narcissistic scheme to transform the Middle East into some version of Euro-American society and make them like white people. Russian intervention in Syria has assisted the government there in resisting US efforts at regime change. Turkey, with its own regional grand scheme, has become emboldened by obvious US weaknesses and is attempting to chart its own course that would challenge US hegemony by fighting for Turkish regional hegemony. Libya, Lebanon, Egypt, Pakistan, ad infinitum are just some of the obvious places where the US is clearly losing its footing. The vicious white nationalist settler state of Israel, a military outpost and strategic asset of the US, cannot squelch the anti-colonial struggle of the Palestinian people to take back their land and evict the colonial interlopers. The legion of other enemies of the Israeli settler state can predict Israel's demise despite all the nefarious intrigue, cyber and other military attacks included, being deployed by Israel in the region and beyond. Everything is in a state of play. The uneasy equilibrium between the past and the future that I described years ago. The US has lost its place as the global political center of gravity. The times are gone when the US power and military superiority served to hold things together and maintain order within the colonial mode of production throughout the world. The Munich Security Conference, convening annually in Germany, is a major colonial capitalist institution that most Africans are not familiar with. Its online journal described its 2020 meeting in a manner that reflects the growing consciousness of imperialist crisis by the global ruling elite. Some imperialist pundits among them have coined the term Westlessness to describe the diminishing power of the colonizers and the growing shakiness of the colonial mode of production. This is an excerpt from the Munich Security Conference journal that reveals a global colonial capitalist ruling class meeting that is much less confident of the future than our plenary. Quote, this is the journal. At the Munich Security Conference 2020 held from February 14th to 16th, hundreds of senior leaders and thinkers from politics, international organizations, business, and civil society gathered to discuss preeminent crises and future security challenges around the world. This is a meeting. These meetings happen in the various kinds of meetings like this happen around the world that most people are not aware of. This is where the future of the world continue to be discussed and planned by the dominant powers in the world as they understand themselves and the world. A focal point at the conference was the role of the Western alliance, liberal values, and multilateralism in the current geopolitical landscape. The Munich Security Conference, MSC 2020, welcomed numerous high-ranking international decision makers, including more than 30 heads of government and heads of state, as well as nearly 100 cabinet ministers. Among the participants were French President Emmanuel Macron, German Minister of Defense Annegret Kramp, Cotton Bow, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs Wang Yi, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund Kristalina Georgieva, a High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs Josep Borrell, Executive Secretary to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Patricia Espinosa Cantellano, and Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Discussion about the state of the West. At the heart of this year's conference was the state of the West and a widespread perception of Westlessness. The term coined by the Munich Security Report 2020 refers to a divided and in some parts increasingly illiberal West that seems to be retreating from the global stage. While the term pervaded debates in Munich, differences quickly emerged. Most importantly, the state of the West and the extent of its crisis were assessed somewhat differently on both sides of the Atlantic. While US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed that Western liberal values were winning and relegated transatlantic disagreements to the level of tactics, his European counterparts seemed much more concerned. They voiced disquiet about the state of Western unity and, like French President Emmanuel Macron, attested a growing inability of the West to shape the international order in line with its values. By contrast, the size of the Chinese threat to the Western community was perceived as much more pronounced by US representatives than their European peers, unquote. The most obvious contradiction facing the US and the colonial powers of Europe is the rise of China that is eclipsing Europe within the existing colonial mode of production that once also held China in its thrall. Discussions are taking place within leading bourgeois colonial journals about the likelihood of direct military confrontation between the US and China, based on assumptions that historically major powers such as the US have always resorted to arms when necessary to curtail the rise of serious contenders. Now China is a major player, the barely disputed leading economy that is making such rapid inroads to previously held US spheres of influence that the US government and media commonly refers to China as an adversary, with its growth of power and influence being the primary determinant for such a characterization. Consequently, the US is deploying anti-China war games and provocative intrusions in the Asia-Pacific region with the unconcealed intent of power projections to protect the existing global political and economic configuration and to deter China and intimidate any country that might seek in China a different imperial patron. China is a country that initially broke free from the colonial mode of production with its revolution of 1949 under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Led by Chairman Mao Zedong, the Chinese Communist Party initiated a bold revolutionary struggle that became a model for colonized peoples worldwide. Mao broke from what was generally characterized as Marxism and used the dialectical and historical materialist method of investigation and analysis that was developed by Marx and others, created an approach to revolution based on Marxism or communism with so-called Chinese characteristics that would be called Mao Zedong thought. The Chinese Revolution changed the way in which Chinese were able to view themselves and forced the world to see China differently as true accomplices of history that stunted the growth of colonial capitalism in Asia. Not only did the Chinese Communist Party unite the Chinese nation, it played a significant role in pushing back US colonial military aggression in Korea, fighting it to a standstill shortly after China's successful revolution and deterring total US domination of Asia. Much has changed since that time, and China has joined the colonial mode of production on its own terms. But the fact remains that China continues to be a growing bone in the throat of US colonial capitalism, despite the apparent rapprochement that occurred during US President Richard Milhous Nixon's regime, that the US thought had defamed China and turned it into an inert, opulent object of exploitation. Unlike many other countries the US was dealing with throughout the world, China was not an inert neo-colony. It had won its independence through revolutionary struggle under the leadership of a revolutionary party. Although hobbled by the global colonial mode of production, China had initiated a post-revolutionary independent path of development that made it less vulnerable to US and other colonialist economic penetration and political blandishments. Along with China, Russia is a bone in the throat of US imperialism. Russia is another country that has fractured the global hegemony of the US. Shortly after the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union, that used to be called Soviet Russia, the US and other European colonial powers confidently assumed Russia and China could be transformed into satellites within the colonial mode of production under US authority. They did not understand either country or the historical process that gave rise to their current iterations. All the other European countries had come into existence through colonialism. It was colonialism that pulled them out of the feudal mode of production and into prosperous capitalism resting on our enslavement. Not true of Russia. Russia was a semi-feudal country that entered into a semblance of modernity through its revolution in 1917. It was the Russian Revolution in which socialists came to power that allowed the limited development of Russia, not colonialism. Russia has also set out on an independent path, refusing to concede to US domination. It has projected its power into the Middle East on the side of US strategic opponents like the governments of Syria and Iran, and established relations with other, sometimes contradictory Middle Eastern states that provide them some leverage in their negotiations with the US and Israel. Additionally, Russia continues to fight the encroachment of NATO, a projection of US military state power into the traditional spheres of interest of the former Soviet Union. This is a part of the entire intent of the United States to control and dominate the world, or to continue such world domination. In 2014, a US-influenced coup overthrew the government of Ukraine after it refused to break with Russia and become a vassal of Europe and the US, to the chagrin of the colonial powers. This intervention did not go unanswered by Russia, that supported the referendum in Crimea, Ukraine, mandating the separation of Crimea from the coup makers. Russia has also supported the armed struggle against the coup that continues in Ukraine up to now. Not only did this put another damper on US moves for domination of the world, but it is one of the factors that has exposed the limitations of US military power, historically used to cow peoples and governments into submission. The US and its proxies in the European Union, England, and other arenas are engaged in heated propaganda assaults against Russia that are accompanied by threatening US nuclear capable military flyovers of Russian border areas. There have also been attacks on Russian military forces supporting the Syrian government by Israel, a significant US military outpost of no little significance. In December of 2021, US President Joseph Biden convened a meeting with more than 100 countries that was defined as a summit of democracies. It is not important that the US would be hard-pressed to justify these invitees as democracy, even by US definition. The real arrogance of this sham summit is the fact that it is a summit that would be called and hosted by the US, with its very existence as a settler state existing on the stolen land of a people still ensconced in concentration camps referred to as Indian reservations. The economy of the US was irrefutably developed by the stolen labor of Africans and other colonized peoples within the US prison of nations. The term America is derived from the name of a white man whose only connection to the land is through the legacy of European colonialism. The US has initiated what might be called a Cold War with China and Russia as its main targets, by casting as main opposing antagonists democracies versus autocracies. Of course, the US and its minions are the democracies in China, Russia, and any other force in active opposition to US machinations are characterized as autocracies. The fact that Russia makes no pretense of being a socialist or communist state only serves to illustrate that the so-called Cold War between Russian and Chinese communism versus US and Western capitalism in the past served the same purpose as Biden's democracy gambit to protect a shaky colonial mode of production today. During the Cold War era, the colonial powers of the West were engaged in every effort to protect the colonial mode of production that they foresaw experiencing a domino effect of colonial losses due to intervention by communist Russia and China that were never incorporated into the colonial mode of production. Members of the African People's Socialist Party and our movement are not bamboozled by the nonsense of democracies versus autocracies. We are quite clear that democracies and autocracies are merely forms of the state, and that it would be near lunacy to engage in struggle based on these characterizations. But this is also a matter of smoke and mirror politics that attempt to take advantage of the fact that most people do not recognize that democracy and autocracy are themselves forms of the state. The state that works in the interest of the ruling class. The state that is an organ of coercion. This US characterization of the form of the state does not define the content of the society it governs. Ancient Greece is held up as the epitome of democracy by the colonial capitalist ruling class, although 80% of its population was enslaved. It is similar to the often used term of fascism given to intra-colonial crises when capitalism reveals itself in its nakedness, its colonial birthday suit, so to speak. In such cases, the colonizers find it necessary to protect the notion of capitalism as essentially democratic, something even communist colonizers are also guilty of. Like the term autocracy is used by Biden, the term fascism is an attempt to obscure the very nature of a system by defining it according to the form of the state used to protect and advance its interests. A democracy or an autocracy does not determine the essence of the society. Otherwise, the colonial capitalist US or the virulently murderous and anti-democratic white nationalist settler state of Israel could not be considered for discussion. The issue continues to be democracy for whom? A colonial mode of production is defined essentially by the fact that the democracy of the colonizer comes at the expense of democracy for the colonized self-determination. A colonialist negating existence is what democracy looks like, whether the colonizer society itself is under democratic or fascist rule. Biden farcical summit coming in the wake of millions of African-led protests and uprisings within the US and a white settler-initiated coup attempt against the white settler colonial government a year ago is a poor attempt to cover the existential crisis the US is currently experiencing and to mobilize whatever possible fraying support, domestic or internationally, to the side of the traditional democratic colonizer states led by the United States. Biden will not be able to explain his way out of the existential crisis the colonial capitalist system is experiencing with empty slogans and campaigns that require the disorganized acquiescence of the colonized for their success. Our party is determined to expose the nature of the contradiction by relentlessly forwarding the struggle against colonial capitalism, by building our party and escalating the struggle for African liberation and redemption. The heroic people of Cuba and South America, including Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Colombia, among others, are not lulled into some kind of acquiescence by Biden's democracy mumbo jumbo. Haiti is not the only Caribbean country that cannot be immobilized in our fight for total liberation by Biden's blandishment. The struggle goes on relentlessly. The most important thing for us to understand, even as we recognize all the clear signs of irreversible US hegemonic decline, is that all the struggles we are witnessing and experiencing are occurring on the foundation of colonial capitalism. They are struggles that are in some ways similar to the January 6th attempted coup by settlers in the United States. They are struggles occurring on a foundation of colonialism. They are not struggles that are inherently opposed to the colonial mode of production, except in the sense that they contribute to the deepening crisis, the quantitative changes that will facilitate the great qualitative leap to revolutionary transformation we were founded 50 years ago to accomplish. We point out the despairing words of imperialist pundits. A year ago, we spoke about this crisis in our political report to the 7th Plenary, using the despairing words of thinking representatives of the colonial capitalist ruling class. that also reveal the way the US colonial capitalists are defining themselves and what they see as their primary opponents. And then we quote here from the political report from a year ago. The July-August 2020 edition of the bourgeois journal Foreign Affairs is dedicated to this discussion. You see, we use the bourgeoisie and how they even perceive themselves and the world as part of the evidence that we use about the state of the world. And it's important in the process of doing that to even be able to sum up how the colonial capitalist leaders and thinking representatives perceive themselves in relationship to the world and how they perceive the state of their own security and insecurity. So we say the July-August 2020 edition of the bourgeois journal Foreign Affairs is dedicated to this discussion. One joint submission by Alexander Cooley and Daniel H. Netson has the revealing title, How Hegemony Ends, the Unraveling of American Power. A vicious cycle that erodes US power has replaced the virtuous cycles that once reinforced it. With the rise of great powers such as China and Russia, autocratic and illiberal projects rival the US-led liberal international system. Developing countries and even many developed ones can seek alternative patrons rather than remain dependent on Western largesse and support. And illiberal, often right-wing transnational networks are pressing against the norms and pieties of the liberal international order that once seemed so implacable. In short, US global leadership is not simply in retreat, it is unraveling. And the decline is not cyclical, but permanent, unquote. This is one of the leading thinking representatives of the ruling class, its journal. So imperialism is experiencing obvious disarray. Last year's political report to the party's second plenary of our 7th Congress made the basic points to be understood by the party concerning the dying but not yet dead colonial capitalist system when we quoted extensively from the previous political report from 2020. We are quoting that again as a reminder that our understandings of this period are fundamentally the same. The following excerpt will correctly describe the worsened crisis of imperialism that continues to contextualize our revolutionary work. It represents an example of the urgency associated with the 2020 plenary theme, Vanguard Up, and the class-based confusion of Fukuyama and other thinking representatives of colonial capitalism. Quote, imperialism is experiencing obvious disarray. The international bourgeoisie is split in 1,000 different ways. Raging wars and threats of war continue unabated. Traditional bourgeois alliances are under severe stress due to growing competition between parasitic international thieves for shrinking access to colonial resources. They're fighting over resources violently extracted at the expense of our lives and freedoms, and totally necessary for the continued success of the global capitalist system. The economic configuration of the world is undergoing transformation at this very moment. Trade wars between China and the US, the Brexit crisis that has paralyzed England politically and disrupted strategic assumptions of capitalist development in Europe and the world, the growing split between the wealthy North and poor South threatening the future of Spain, the disruptive emergence of an energized, if economically challenged Russia contesting US hegemony in the Middle East and upsetting the balance of forces in Europe and elsewhere. The audacious China that sometimes aligned with Russia is increasingly willing to openly contend with the US. These are just a few of the examples of an imperialism experiencing existential crisis. There are others: Korea, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, most of the Americas. Uninformed and poorly led battles are raging across the African continent. This is complicated by the contest for economic and political advantage between China, the US, and former European colonizers. This is a contest that does not have the advantage of a fully developed, coherent, African internationalist informed and organized effort by Africans to conquer power in our own name and in our own interest. The US is the headquarters of a dying imperialism as we have known it for the past 70 years at least. It is the center of the storm, wreaking havoc with imperialist unity internationally, in part because of domestic imperialist disunity. Climate crisis caused by the colonial mode of production. In addition to the geopolitical crisis of imperialism due to the resistance of the colonized. The colonial mode of production is responsible for a climate crisis that is serious beyond most belief. There's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there has been in nearly 4.5 million years, millions of years before the appearance of almost all life on Earth. The last time the world was this hot was 125,000 years ago. The massive amounts of carbon dioxide get trapped in the atmosphere surrounding the Earth and causing the Earth to get hotter and hotter like a greenhouse. This heat is rapidly melting the ice in the Arctic and Antarctic that for hundreds of thousands of years has remained frozen all year round. In 2021, temperatures in the Arctic Circle reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time ever recorded. In fact, the polar regions are heating up faster than any other part of the planet. The permanent ice cover reflected the sun's rays away from the Earth and served as the planet's air conditioner. With the ice gone, more blue ocean is now exposed and the water soaks up the sun's rays, heating the oceans. This process is rapidly killing plants and sea life, creating sea level rise that will soon drown cities on coast, along with producing massive droughts and killer storms with wind strength never seen before, increased earthquake and volcano activity, along with the rise of heat and humidity that in some places is approaching temperatures greater than 120 degrees on a regular basis. Already 200 species a day are going extinct, something that scientists call the sixth mass extinction, the last one being when all the dinosaurs abruptly died. There was not mention of mass extinction when scores of millions of African and indigenous people were wiped out by European slaughter. The major cause of this global warming from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is emission from cars, planes, factories, part and parcel of the colonial mode of production built on slavery, genocide, plunder, and rape. I just want to say something here, because when we say that the major cause of this global warming from carbon dioxide comes from cars, planes, factories, there is in the minds of some people that cars, planes, factories, and what have you are representative of progress, and that this is what colonialism, white power, white people brought to the planet Earth, progress. And this is an erroneous way of perceiving this, what we are talking about, because we're talking about a mode of production that came into existence through colonialism. And it means that an existence of a social system that required pushing other peoples out of meaningful self-serving production, which means that what has happened is this colonial mode of production that we are experiencing now is the consequence of white people, white power, Europeans, what we now know as Europeans, coming to power, to authority, to essential existence at the expense of everybody else in the social system that they created through plunder, through rape and pillage, is a social system that dominates the entire world as a consequence, not of white genius, because much of what we're talking about when we look at planes and cars and factories and what have you it comes as a consequence of Europe being able to colonize, of the science and genius of masses of people around the world claim it as Europeans of their own, but the system and the direction and how things would develop. I mean, Europeans didn't discover feeding and each other and eating and economy. What they discovered, what they created was an economy that was based on servitude, slavery, colonialism, and the rest of it. And to say that this represents progress is to presuppose that the whole world, had this global economy not come into existence, that the world would have automatically been one based on slavery, colonialism, et cetera. And I'm saying that's not the case. That doesn't represent modernity. That represents the emergence of a colonial mode of production. So But moving forward, say the major cause of this global warming from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is emission from cars, planes, factories, part and parcel of the colonial mode of production built on slavery, genocide, plunder, and rape. All of the climate conferences, so-called climate agreements, and imperialist demonstrations are meaningless manifestation of white opportunist idealism. All of the climate conferences, so-called climate agreements, and imperialist demonstrations are meaningless manifestations of white opportunist idealism. Imperialism caused the climate crisis from its very inception, with the assault on Africa and kidnapping of African people beginning in the 1400s. Oil and natural gas, the two greatest polluters on the planet, are the two most lucrative commodities of colonial capitalism. The interests of oil and gas are one with the US state, with the largest, most deadly military on earth, and the colonial interests of the entire US political and economic system. These commodities are the basis for US wars throughout the Middle East and conquest in Africa, the US and Asia. Oil and gas are tied to the white colonial prosperity and way of life. Clearly, the real issue is colonial capitalism, not the climate. European imperialism created and maintains this situation in one long trajectory that began when the first white person got off the boat in Africa and captured an African person, forced her into a ship to steal her genius, her labor, and her land and resources. While white climate scientists fear what they call loss of habitat for human beings, the fact is, this is it. While white climate scientists fear loss of habitat for human beings, the fact is that as we have pointed out, the habitats of Africans and indigenous people have long been destroyed by Europe's colonial assault on our peoples for 600 years in the process of creating the habitat and production and reproduction of life for white people. Nothing will change the climate crisis short of total destruction of the colonial mode of production, and only the organized African working class in the form of the African People's Socialist Party can do that. Nothing makes this point better than the assumption by some climatologists that the Little Ice Age of the 16th century was caused by the rapid European slaughter of millions of indigenous people in the Americas during the century following Columbus' so-called discovery of the New World. This massive genocide halted farming and village life, destroying human habitats that resulted in massive encroachment of forests and a consequent decrease of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that cooled the planet. This colonial assault on the climate resulted in the extermination of an estimated 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas, from an estimated 60.5 million people in 1496 to only 6 million people by 1600. The climate crisis being experienced and discussed by frantic colonial academics and environmentalists today is a crisis that began with the intrusion of the white man, the colonizers, that created the colonial mode of production that is now pushing into the lives of a colonizer with greater intensity. The recent recognition of the impact of colonial destruction had on what is now called the Americas, precisely because of this colonialism, does not even consider the impact of the colonial attack on Africa that destroyed lives and human habitats in Africa, at least equal to that in the Americas. Entire cities were destroyed or evacuated by Africans fleeing capture by colonial slavers. Just as in the Americas, these parts of Africa were left to the forest, something that also contributed to carbon dioxide reduction that cooled the earth in the first centuries of Europe's onslaught on Africans and all those who today continue to struggle under the yoke of the violence of the colonial mode of production. The changing climate is one of the many fronts of imperialist crisis being pushed to the surface by a social system, a mode of production driven by profit above all else. The climate catastrophe and the COVID pandemic are among the combination of factors undermining the colonial capitalist production process that has already experienced an altered planetary configuration nearly as pronounced as the Earth's wobble on its axis caused by melting glaciers in the Arctic. The irrational competition built into the colonial capitalist system has also contributed to the so-called supply chain disruption, preventing the efficient movement of commodities from sellers to buyers throughout the world. In fact, goods are characterized as commodities precisely because they are not produced for the benefit of the people, but for profit. They are produced for the market. Free market economy, as defenders of the colonial mode of production proudly refer to it. Every corporation in every colonialist capitalist country is in competition with every other country or corporation. There can be no planning. And this is really important to understand, because what we're looking at here is a social system, a colonial capitalist mode of production, which is a system where the one sector, the world has now been united. The whole global, the world's economy has been united through the emergence, through the creation, through the forced creation, through rape, pillage, kidnapping, and what have you, as a relationship defined by the colonizers extracting value from the colonized, where the vast majority of the people on earth, the different countries and what have you and peoples now exist essentially as means of procuring value and the ability of the colonizer to live and to enjoy life. This is the relationship that we are talking about. So this is something that a whole social system comes through this concept of conquest and slavery and brigandage and kidnapping and what have you. And every aspect of it is parasitic. It's a parasitic social system. It's born parasitic. And the discovery by Lenin in the 19th century or the 20th century of the parasitism in this colonial of the capitalist system, the fact is that it was born parasitic. We've always experienced the parasite. And the discovery of Lenin of parasitic, of what he characterized as capitalism, grown so significant that it becomes, it has become parasitic. To define what he refers to as imperialism is similar to how the white environmentalists are now finding environmental crisis at this late date, after the crisis has decimated 50 million indigenous people. That was something about 1600. How many more, people have been killed since that time? And it had, how many Africans died in this process? And that was the beginning of the contradiction. So now we see a situation where, like the climatologist Lenin and all of this, Lenin discovers parasitism at some late date, this is in the 20th century, where he discovers parasitism. And we are saying that the parasite was born at least in the 15th century. At least when you see the beginning of the attack on Africa by Portugal, that was a part of the process of creating the existing world economy within which we struggle and try to live. So with this parasitic foundation, every corporation and every colonialist capitalist country is in competition with every other country or corporation. There can be no planning to make production beneficial to the people. Anarchy is a signature feature of the colonial capitalist economic system of the colonial mode of production. Crisis is built into the system of market production. The colonial mode of production functions on a fault line of colonialism that guarantees permanent crisis. This is a crisis of imperialism, of the colonial mode of production that our plenary is focused on deepening. Indeed, the liberation and redemption of Africa and Africans that our party is enabling globally are the most important ingredients for the death of a social system based on slavery, and the basis for the emergence of a new world of free and liberated people with a free and liberated economy under the leadership of our party and the workers of the world. Everything that has been mentioned up to this point, from the climate crisis to the various machinations of existing or emerging powers, rely on the colonial mode of production for its being. This is a colonial capitalist world order, an imperialist created and nourished world order. Every contradiction that occurs within this colonial world order can be overcome only by a relentless assault on colonial capitalism itself under the leadership of our party that was created for that purpose. This gives greater urgency at this critical time for all our work to build and expand the reach of our party, to recruit into the dynamic process of party organization that can only conclude in victory in the total liberation and unification of Africa and African people, the liberation and redemption of Africa, of African people and our motherland under the leadership of the African working class, selfishly organized in the interest of Africa and the African working class. Uhuru, Comrade Akile.
Uhuru, Chairman. Wow. I mean, that's such a profound chapter, especially following the colonialism, a mode of production. So you've explained colonialism as a mode of production, and then you get into how this whole system, this world order, colonial capitalism is under assault. Here is all of the evidence that you've provided, and also evidence that predicted this this reality today. And, you know, just further, it's further evidence of what the correctness of the theory of African internationalism. And I mean, I'm not going to take up, you know, the time in discussion, but I mean, that's just really profound, Chairman. Just really
good. I think what you said is really important because everybody should notice that that the basis of our investigation and analysis is historical materialism. It's the basis is an African internationalist worldview. It's a science. There's no reliance here on any kind of ooga boogaism, birth months, or religion or anything like that, because all the peoples of the world exist in this world. And whatever their birth dates, whatever their religion, whatever their so-called signs, et cetera, we exist in this world. And everybody on the planet Earth is engaged in the process, either consciously as a part of societies to create life, to be able to get what is needed for food, clothing, and shelter, and advancing our lives as human beings. That's what we're all engaged in. That's the basis. That's the fundamental question. That is like a materialist assessment of what it is that's necessary for us to live and exist. And there's no right religion or wrong religion or anything like that that plays into this, the alignment of the stars or the planets or anything like that. We rely on a scientific understanding and assessment. And then using this scientific assessment, this investigation, we can show how the world got to be this way. And we show not only that, but we show its vulnerabilities at the point we're doing that. And to say that we hate the social system that has come into existence, robbing all the peoples, majority of the peoples of the world of resources that we need to be self-serving in the sense of collectively. There is no such thing as that under this kind of colonial system, and everything is designed, as we said, produced for profit and not for the people. That's the kind of social system that is natural and normal when you look at the fact that it came out of slavery and colonial terror and stealing people's resources globally. And there's no way to even explain the existence of this thing that is often referred to as the United States, without going into the question of the decimation, the murder, the mayhem that was committed against the indigenous people here, and the conditions that the indigenous people are experiencing right now, whether they call themselves Mexicans or Ecuadorians or whether they call themselves by some other characterization of that speaks to the fact that they are really an indigenous people. And or the African people globally. There is this direct relationship, and we demand, African internationalists demand that we recognize that there is a dialectic here that is extraordinarily necessary for us to understand the way that the world got to be the way it is, to understand the way the world is. There's a dialectic here, and that this dialectic expresses the colonial mode of production, where the vast majority of people live and exist and create only for the benefit, primarily for the benefit of a colonizer. And I just think that's really important for us to understand. But go ahead, Comrade Akile, take us forward. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. And you got people in the comments saying they didn't want you to stop, but unfortunately that's the end of chapter 3. So we're going to go ahead and go into our announcements, but we are shortly going to venture into our question and answer period. So if you have not went ahead and asked your question, go ahead and type that into the Facebook or YouTube chat section, wherever it is that you're viewing from. Go ahead and type your question into the chat, and let's go ahead and get those announcements up so we can tell people what we've got going on. All right, so this study is being brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, where we're winning the war of ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. You can get more political education from Chairman Omali Yeshitela in every issue of the Burning Spear newspaper. Become a subscriber today. Get a 1-year subscription, 12 issues delivered straight to your door or your email inbox for $25. Gift a subscription to comrades and family members, and sponsor a prisoner. You can do all of this at theburningspear.com/subscribe. Calling on Spear distributors. It's the last call for January Spears, and now is the time to pre-order your February Spears. Get the Spear out in your community. Order your bundles today at burningspearmarketplace.com. Omali Taught Me airs on Black Power 96 FM radio, a project of the African People's Education and Defense Fund, with the slogan, not just explaining the world, but changing it. Listen on 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida, or streaming online at blackpower96.org and on the free Black Power 96 mobile app. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All of the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. Someone commented, what do we do about colonial capitalism? African revolution is the only solution. So join apspuhuru.org. This coming Wednesday, January 26th at 6 p.m. Central Time, join White Solidarity with Black Power Live, hosted by the African People's Solidarity Committee. APSC Chair Penny Hess and USM Chair Jesse Neville will discuss the rapid growth of prisons and the drug economy imposed on Black communities as part of the counterinsurgency against the Black Revolution of the 1960s. Learn how African resistance is crashing the colonial prison economy today, and how white people can find their true interests under the leadership of the African struggle for freedom, building unity through reparations. Register at tinyurl.com/no-colonial-prisons. On Friday, January 28th at 7 p.m. Central Time, join the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project for their monthly Aya Resistance Circle, which uses the theory of African internationalism to discuss the impacts of colonialism on the mental and physical health of African people and our communities. This month's topic is horizontal violence, and the event will take place on Zoom. Register at tinyurl.com/Aya register. That's AYA register. On Saturday, January 29th, from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, the Northern Region of the African People's Socialist Party presents the Washington, D.C. stop of the Vanguard Tour. We invite the public to attend this event to learn more about the Uhuru movement. Presentation topics include the Party of the African Working Class, the special oppression of African women, the history of building anti-colonial economic development institutions, African working class mass organizing, white people's reparations to the African community, African skills for African liberation. Visit theburningspear.com/events for more info and the registration link. Calling on all party and Uhuru movement members and supporters, attend the 2022 Plenary Conference of the African People's Socialist Party, February 11th through 14th, 2022. This title of this year's plenary is Relentless, 50 Years of Leadership Toward African Redemption. Our plenaries and congresses have become the vehicle for an ongoing assessment of our work and the conditions in the world affecting our struggle for total liberation and unification of every square inch of Africa and the entire globally dispersed African nation. Registration for this 4-day online conference costs just $25. Read the full call to attend by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and register by going to apspplenary.org. The African National Women's Organization calls on Black women and our supporters to attend the Black Women's Convention, March 25th to 27th, 2022. The BWC is an annual gathering of working class Black women who believe that capitalist colonialism must be destroyed in order for African women to be free. We believe that by building an organization that is dedicated to raising deep struggle against the devastating impact of colonialism in the lives of African women around the world, we will consolidate and fortify our efforts to defeat capitalism, despite our borders or our condition. Because of COVID, this will be a virtual event. The early registration deal is available now through January 25th. Go to convention.anwouhuru.org for more information. Like and follow the Lowezi Kinshasa like page on Facebook for more African internationalist political education. Secretary General Lowezi Kinshasa does frequent live events, such as the War of Ideas series. He includes live sessions done in French. To get alerts of when Eshi Lowezi is going live, make sure to like and follow his page today. Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles in Oakland, California is hiring a full-time truck driver and full-time marketing coordinator. If you have driving and furniture lifting skills, social media and print marketing experience, or if you can work Wednesday through Sunday, then apply for these positions and contribute your labor and skills to this institution of the African People's Education and Defense Fund. Apply by visiting uhurufurniture.blogspot.com. On Tuesday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, join Ralph Pointer on What's Happening Blog Talk Radio. Tune in by calling 347-857-3293. Ralph Pointer sits on the Black is Back Coalition Steering Committee and chairs the BIBC's Political Prisoners Working Group and also leads the Lynn Stewart Committee. We are calling on people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. APDEP has an international telehealth program, which is a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. To keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. And our last announcement, make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. So that concludes our announcements for today. We're going to go ahead now and go into the Q&A portion. So again, make sure you type those into the Facebook and YouTube chat. Chairman, we're going to take a look at a question from last week that came in from Comrade Jamal in Moorhead, Minnesota. Said Uhuru, Comrade Chairman, thank you for this study and the quotations from the Second Internationale that demonstrates that even those politically advanced colonizers who will call themselves our allies have a view of the world that relies on our oppression as colonized Africans. And this is in relationship to Chapter 2. Do the few Western European uprisings of the 20th and 21st centuries, Ireland, Basque, Catalonia, represent a national consciousness which challenges Europeanness?
I think the answer to that question, you mentioned the Basque and Irish. I certainly think that they challenge the colonial mode of production. And the Irish, as you know, fought 800 years of colonial domination by England. Ireland has been dealing with that. The Irish have been. And but the colonial mode of production has not existed as a global phenomenon for 800 years. Although it was a part of the foundation for every success that the British assumed for itself. And the Basque have been fighting for a long period of time too. So I do think that they both represent a struggle against colonial mode of production. And I think that the Irish, I don't know that much in depth about how the Basque have described themselves. Therefore, I can't speak that much in terms of the consciousness there, which I think is part of what this question raises. Although I think the Irish, certainly a sector of the Irish population has been quite conscious and aware of that. So, in fact, one of the reasons that the Irish Republican Socialist Party and we were able to really develop early on an important relationship is because not only did they recognize that that they were oppressed colonially, but they also saw within that colonial construct the class struggle that existed in Ireland. And so I don't know if I answered Comrade Jamal's question the way it was asked. But I do believe for sure, and that struggle, by the way, in Ireland, as far as those who hold the belief in similar to the Irish Republican Socialist Party, is far from being over. It's still going on, despite the fact that the so-called troubles, as they were, as this heated resistance was characterized for a long time. The so-called troubles seem to have ended. That struggle continues, and there are revolutionaries in Ireland who continue to wage this class struggle within this struggle for the liberation of Ireland and the Irish people. So, Comrade Jamal, I don't know if I spoke effectively to what you just raised, but that's my response to it, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Comrade Jamal, for your question. And my mistake, I forgot to acknowledge where people are viewing from. So let me go ahead and do that. We have Battle Creek, Michigan, Portland, Oregon, St. Petersburg, Florida, occupied Azania or South Africa, Huntsville, Alabama, San Diego, California, Atlanta, Georgia, Gainesville, Florida, Richmond, Virginia, Birmingham, Alabama, Greenville, South Carolina, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Oakland, California, Sacramento, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Hempstead, New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Fort Myers, Florida, Trinidad, Ohio, and Marion County, Georgia on with us. So, Uhuru, comrades, thank you for tuning in wherever it is that you're located. So, Chairman, we're going to move now to this week's questions. And our first one is coming from Comrade Kumba in St. Louis, Missouri. Says, Chairman, how is it that London or Brexit is paralyzed according to your reading?
Well, I'm not saying that London or Brexit, either of them is paralyzed. I am saying that London or what else did he mention? But I'm saying that Brexit, that is to say that British exit, that's where the Brexit thing comes from. There was an assumption of this European Union that would be ever growing and that would even function as a sort of, if not contender, certainly an economic and political force that would be equal to that of the United States, combining all of Europe into the single union. And much of the political and economic expectations of not only in Europe, but and much of the world presupposed that the emergence of this force and the stability of this force and people planned in England and other places around that. Then Brexit, this was caused in part because the stresses on somebody we quoted earlier on, perhaps that was on yesterday, on last week. Well, if not yet, there's a quote from Hosea Jaffe that we use extensively that talked about how Europe, even came into being, and that how European colonialism and plunder was what helped to unite and bring it all together. But we said just as this was the basis of its unity, that is the colonialism, it was also the basis of its disunity in the sense that the Europeans were always fighting over who was going to get what part of the colonial booty. And now we have a situation where, because the whole mode of production is under stress because of the growing success or of people's fighting for liberation, or because of the destabilization and uncertainty thrown into the system because of that, then it's almost like we've characterized every white man for himself in different countries, not in the world, but also in Europe. We see the breakup of England and sections of the British population in terms of their own brain. Just like in the United States, people, white people see themselves as losing because of immigrants and things like that. Now you have England, white people in England assuming that their economic distress or contradictions have to do with the fact that they will open up to all of Europe, and in the face of Europe and England overall losing access to colonial resources. And so this is the explanation, and this is the only explanation they can come up with, because England and Europe, none of them recognize that the foundation of their well-being is the colonized, those of us from whom it is stealing everything. It's their own genius that's built into the consciousness of the people that is responsible for how well off they are. And so if something is going wrong, it's because of the relationship with the other peoples around them, whether they are in India or whether they're from Haiti or whether they're from Africa, or those other S-holes that Trump would define and win all of the support from white people. So in the United States, in England and Europe, there was this whole assumption of the growth and development of Europe and European influence and power that I said that also presuppose the ability to contend effectively with the United States, economically and politically. That's gone. And when England walked out, it set up, and with Brexit, that is British exit from the European Union, it opened up questions for the solidity of the European Union, so that there are others who are talking about doing a similar thing. And there's evidence all over Europe of fracturing European unity. So that's what we're talking about, Kumba. And all the plans that were being made by the imperialists, whether they were in America or any other place, about how things were going to advance as a consequence of the European Union has been, they have been altered and sometimes disrupted. And then all the plans that forces have made in terms of having to defend themselves from this existing, from the emerging European Union as something that these plans have been altered as well. The Brexit was a major assault on certain assumptions about the unity of Europe and the development and direction of the European project itself. And in fact, if you remember, comrades, that Europe is a relatively new phenomenon. It came into existence in part through unifying around resources that were stealing from the rest of the world. Before then, it was no such thing as Europe. It was just these contending Normans and Saxons and Celts and all these other forces fighting each other for survival and advantage. So, Comrade Kumba, I hope I spoke to what you just raised. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, and thank you, Comrade Kumba, for your question. And Comrade Jamal commented, Chairman, that you spoke to his question. You spoke to it well. That was Comrade Jamal. So our next question comes from Comrade Kemu on Facebook. He says, Chairman, what is your take on what happened in Seattle with the takeover of territory as autonomous zones? Do you think this could be a vehicle in which we move?
Well, I mean, it could be. I mean, just in terms of, I don't think it is necessarily, but with the development of an influence and organizational intervention by the party, by the revolution, by the party, then it could be. I mean, because part of what it does is it serves the purpose of attempting to fracture the European territorial and integrity of the European territory and state. So if you have folk being able to take that, in some ways that would be a benefit that could be described for even things like the 5-state project that many new Africans, quote unquote, were involved in. It's not the answer to the revolution, but those kinds of acts can contribute to a kind of quantitative development of the revolutionary project that contributes to fracturing the integrity of the colonial capitalist state territory and what have you. So depending on the influence that revolutionary forces could have in there, I think it might have been Seattle where the masses went beyond some things that we've seen happen in this country. And Seattle, by the way, is white. Well, you know, kind of. But it went so far as to actually capture, was that Seattle where actually captured and torched a police station? I think it might have been. And our party has been involved at a different time in our history and struggled in Seattle we captured a police station before it became a police station, when the government there was talking about taking a part of the community, the colonized African community, to put a police station right there in the middle of the community. We were a part of that process of occupying that landmark for a period of time there. So all of that can contribute to a quantitative disintegration of the integrity of the colonial capitalist state, and it could be something that is positive and progressive. But the question is that before us all is taking power, and we can capture these entities, but obviously it can't exist by itself like that. There has to be a really authoritative, powerful movement that's associated with that project. But I thought, so in and of itself, it's not something that we would criticize. The only criticism we might have is that it was not conscious of itself as being a part of overthrowing the colonial capitalist system. It was not conscious of itself as that. Is self-consciousness as we were able to perceive it had to do essentially with an assault on how the colonial capitalist system was expressing itself there in Seattle, having to do with police relations, the relationship of the state, et cetera. Our objective has to be to capture power. And as a part of an international revolutionary party that recognizes that the entire colonial capitalist system rests on a foundation of colonialism, I think it would have been, much more effective and could have been connected with every other struggle that people are involved in the United States and around the world. So, who was that? Who was that from?
That was Kemu.
Kemu. So that's part of how I would address that commentation.
Uhuru. Thank you, Kemu, for your question. Thank you, Chairman. So our next question comes from, I'm sorry?
Kemu is in Birmingham, isn't he?
Birmingham, yes.
Okay.
Uhuru. Our next question comes from Comrade Kimberly on Facebook. She asks, are there initiatives in this movement to move food security forward as we face the perils of climate change? And there's a second question here. Should we collaborate with indigenous peoples?
And we've always said, Comrade Kimberly, that the African Revolution is also a part of the Revolution of the Americas. And we've always recognized that the twin pillars of the foundation of colonial capitalism in this hemisphere is African colonial enslavement and the theft of the indigenous people's land, et cetera. So it has been African labor essentially connected to indigenous land that has been part of that. And we've always recognized that. And we've always recognized that the US, as far as the native people are concerned, is a settler colony, and the white people are settlers here. They are settlers. There's no exception. This is not an attempt to insult anybody. It's just an objective truth. And if you don't recognize and understand that, then you can't get to the issue of the liberation of the indigenous peoples here or any place else. And secondly, so why don't we say if white people are settlers because they are not from here, they came and took somebody's land, and why do we not characterize the African population here as settlers? Because we are part of a domestic colony where the Europeans who settled here went and captured African people on the continent of Africa and dispersed us around the world and brought us here and held us in a state of colonialism, not on our own land as they are doing with the indigenous people, but they brought us and hold us as a part of a domestic colony on this territory that they've settled. I just want to say that we recognize the significance and have always worked with indigenous people. I spent time at Big Mountain much earlier on in the party's work when the Diné or so-called Navajo people were under assault by the United States government, who had determined that they were going to take that land. Even though they've taken damn near everything from the people, they were going to take even more land, the reservations, and where the indigenous people were located because they had discovered something like uranium or something to that effect, and they wanted that too. It's one of the instances where they've come up with various kinds of treaties that they tried to use to legalize the theft of the land of indigenous people, and then when they saw another reason to take that land or more land, they would break the treaty, et cetera. So that's part of what was happening there. And we've always had this respect and recognition of, and it's part of the basis that we've used to fight against the assumption of that somehow the Africans in the United States, by virtue of being in the United States, the persons of the group. We are the group that somehow, because we in the United States and we work in the United States, that certain territories automatically should be African territories and part of this and by the African nation. And we disagree with that. We characterize that as philosophical opportunism. That the fact is that the indigenous people, part of what defines the terrible state of existence for the indigenous people is the theft of their land. And we end up, for whatever motives that we might attribute to ourselves, but calling this land our land is uniting with the overall struggle, the overall move to keep the indigenous people from having their own land. So I wanted to say that. Secondly, in terms of food security, we everywhere are dealing with this question. And if you look at how the whole colonial capitalist system came into existence, the colonial mode of production, much of it revolved around issues that, like we call agriculture and the theft of lands that were used for production. The whole modern Europe and the modern world, if you want to characterize that, came into existence through what was done by African people on plantations that were created through colonialism in Brazil, throughout the Americas and what have you, that changed the diets of the whole world through our forced production. And part of what is not easily understood, mostly understood, is that the Europeans did not simply capture Africans into colonial mode of production, colonial capitalism, just because they needed muscle, but they stole our technology as well. And even much of where production around food and things like that came about, the selective capture of Africans in different parts of the world who knew how to grow effectively, farm rice and other kinds of crops. This was a part of the whole process of growing their own economy, but it came at the expense of Africa. So we are involved in a very, very serious way in negating the authority of white power we get around and deal with things like food, like this whole supply chain issues by mobilizing African people and everybody that we can for creation of our own capacity to grow food in the backyard, in flower pots on the porch, and in whole communities, and as much land as we can get. We have to make much of that go through the production of food. We promote that. We engage in that. We have created markets, and we have created food production, at least minimally, and promoting that everywhere we are. We've done that in Sierra Leone to some extent. We've done that in St. Louis. We've done it in St. Petersburg, Florida. We've done it and are doing it today in Huntsville, Alabama, and various other places. And we're trying to do it everywhere. We have to be able to take that on because they continue to talk about the supply chain disruption. But there are other factors that can, with this crisis of the whole social system in terms of it being able to provide what people need to live. And it's a system that's based, again, on market production. It is a market-based kind of economy that has no regard for whether people can eat or not, but whether somebody can make a profit. And even today in various cities throughout the United States in particular, and I imagine there is an articulation of similarly in other parts of the European world, where supermarkets and things like that will throw away food, throw away milk and food, et cetera, that they have left over. So that rather than give it to the people, because if they give it to the people, they affect their capacity of being able to sell it in the market. So they'd rather starve people and keep people hungry, so to protect the so-called market-based economy than to do something otherwise. The Revolutionary Project is part of winning food security, and I don't want to make the mistake of contributing to a notion that somehow that the stuff that we do alone, the gardens and the farms that we do alone, will be enough. The fact that the United States government is attacking places like Venezuela and throughout peoples around the world to prevent them from being able to feed and clothe and house themselves, so that they would have the appearance of dependency on white power. Ultimately, the way that we have food security is overturning a social system based on slavery and colonialism, based on market production and what have you. That is the colonial capitalist system. But in the process of doing that, we have initiated projects in various places that are designed to negate the influence and power and to negate what would be the dependency, what appears to be the dependency of African people on a public supermarket or some other kind of network of food production that come from the colonial capitalist system. So that's what it is that we are struggling with, Kimberly. We see that as part of a process of also weakening and exposing that it's really the colonizer, that's dependent on us, and that we have the ability to change our relationship with the colonizer as a part of the process of making this revolution, so that we can guarantee food security by taking the power. Uhuru. I hope that was helpful comment, Kimberly.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, thank you. I thought it was really helpful. And thank you, Kimberly, for raising that question, especially in the context of this chapter that we just read. So thank you again, Kimberly. We're moving now to Comrade Farrow in Greenville, South Carolina. So he has two questions. One, what major contenders against our enemies do you think would be in our strategic interest to partner with in some way to undermine our enemies? And what do you think about building our capacity for a militant takeover of our communities to stop the self-destruction and horizontal violence? At some point, I think it is necessary, if we truly want to end horizontal violence and make where we stay safer and prosperous. Teaching is necessary, I know, but people respect power, and I know that's what we must project.
Projecting power does teach. And so the first thing I want to say is that objectively, that's part of the overall process that we initiate must deal with that. You get an opportunity to come at Pharaoh. If you haven't seen it, you should look at a documentary, a kind of a film rather, that was called The Battle of Algiers. And you see that the NFL, the National Liberation Front in Algeria, as a part of the struggle against France, they had to actually begin to initiate self-government. That's what it's all about. That's what the party is preparing to do every place we are. That's why we've broken down things into regions. That's why we say we have to control every inch of territory wherever we are that's possible to control. It's not just a matter of having events and webinars and things like that. We have to actually take territory, take turf. Even the least political street organization that's called gang understands that better than most so-called revolutionaries, that we have to be the forces that make the determinations there. So we have to have the ability, you don't wait until somehow the revolution mysteriously happened and then you simply walk into some office and assume authority. The revolutionary process itself is part of the ongoing process of acquisition of power, taking political power, taking this community, that community. That's why we have organizations and build organizations block by block and every place else. So to take that power, to take that influence, to say that no force that can be effective or deal with this block, this cell block, this neighborhood community, this campus, or any place without having the permission of the Revolutionary Party. So we have to have the ability to do that. We have to, it's interesting because in 1968, I think it was, that I made a determination, held a press conference when we first began to see drugs being pushed into the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. And I was the leader of an organization that initiated the process to build the African People's Socialist Party. And when we saw those drugs coming in, I held a press conference and made the statement that this might have been in November or December, that by the first of the year, all of the drug pushers in that city would have to cease or desist or get out of town. We know who you are. If you don't stop, we will stop you. And then what happened, of course, is that after that statement was made, the state, the police, the government brought me before a grand jury and to neutralize me and to neutralize Jomo as a force that would move to end that. So the objective here was to, we even put up wanted posters and things like that of drug pushers in our communities and what have you. We were actually part of a project to take that on, and we had to go against the colonial military force, domestic force that's called the police. Once we did that, the whole state apparatus rose up against us. And there's more to that story than is possible to talk about right now, but that did happen. So in response to your assumption, Comrade Pharaoh, yes, we have to assume that power. In terms of what organizations or what forces in the world we should be developing relationships with as opponents of this country, of this system, I think you should go to Tactics and Strategy. We wrote a whole document on tactics and strategy for Black liberation, and this was specific to the United States, but it's bigger than the United States as well. And so we do work and define forces in the world that we can develop unity with. And sometimes we do this through conscious participation with them, and sometimes not. For example, in 1979, after the Iranian Revolution, where the Iranian people kicked out this dirty Uncle Tom Iranian who was working for the United States government, who was being used not only to repress and kill the Iranian people, but also as an armed force, a policeman for United States, for the whole Persian Gulf area. When this revolution happened and they kicked this guy out, before that happened, we had united with the Iranians. We had united with a sector of the Iranian movement that was fighting against the Shah of Iran, as he was characterized at that time. And actually, we had street battles in the city of Gainesville, Florida, in 1979. I think it might have been November, after the Iranians took that so-called nest of spies, the so-called embassy of Iran in Tehran. We've always had that kind of unity. The Iranians didn't ask us to do that. We did it in solidarity because we knew that this was a major blow for the imperialist powers who were oppressing us in the United States. We knew that even if the Iranians didn't necessarily recognize that, even though some Black nationalists in the United States didn't recognize it and criticized us for even being in solidarity with the Iranians, because, as they said, they white people too. When the Salvadorian people rose up to fight against the regime, Somoza regime, the Nicaraguan regime that they had set up and put in power, the Somozas, we were first out of the gate, even before they had succeeded in taking power and uniting with the FSLN, the Sandinista National Liberation Movement. We were first out. We provided them all the resources that we had to contribute to that revolutionary movement. So we've always been that way. And as I mentioned, I was at Big Mountain, and we've done other kinds of work with Palestinians and other people. So that's always been on our agenda. And some people say, well, you can't do that because we got to spend all of our time. We can't go overseas doing this and doing that. Just got to do everything where we are to win our freedom. And they don't understand the interconnectedness of a whole social system, like a colonial mode of production. And of course, central to this defeat is what we do here in the United States, which is why it was so important for us to intervene around El Salvador, around what's happening in Nicaragua, around what's happening in Venezuela and all those other places, and what's happening, of course, in Mother Africa, because the US has been the hegemon that's held the whole thing together. And so we fight on every front we can, recognizing our relationship to oppressed peoples, and that recognition being something that is expressed concretely, politically, in different ways. When we did the Tribunal for Reparation of African People in 1982, we had indigenous people, we had people from various other parts of the world who sat on this as a panel of judges that we used. We've always moved in that direction. So I hope that was helpful, Comrade Pharaoh. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, and thank you, Comrade Pharaoh, for your question. And our next question is coming from Comrade Life. And Life asks, Life says, Uhuru, I deeply appreciate these studies, Chairman. Understanding dialectics is the unity of opposites. How is such unity expressed between materialism and spiritualism/idealism?
Well, dialectic is the unity of opposites. I mean, is a study of the unity of opposites. And I'm not quite sure that the question is best expressed in terms of unity expressed between materialism and spiritualism, except that each needs the other for its definition. That when we talk about, I guess what you might call spiritualism, a better term would be idealism, philosophical idealism versus materialism. It's like you can define each in opposition to the other, and that, in fact, is the unity that each requires the other for its existence, for its identity, like up and down. You can't have an up without a down, or in or without an out, or something to that effect. And the same thing is true if you look at colonialism. You can't have a colonizer without there being a colonized. In order for a colonizer to exist, there must be a colonized. That's why we say, we engage in sometimes dual power, negating the existence of the significance of the colonizer through enhancing the strength and power of those of us who are colonized in the process of becoming uncolonized, and that helps to eliminate the existence of the colonizer as well. And the same thing is true when we look at the issue of what you characterize as spiritualism, and what you do say spiritualism versus idealism versus materialism. And so each needs the other for its definition. Unfortunately, most people, when they think of idealism, they're thinking of an idealist as somebody who has just good thoughts and expects the best in the world, etc. But philosophical idealism is not that. Philosophical idealism is an assumption of the existence of the supremacy of the spiritual or something like that over material, over matter. It is an assumption that whatever exists in the world required for its existence a thought about it, or it required for its existence some force external to the material world creating it, and it presupposes creation. And this is what philosophical idealism does. And materialism teaches us that the world is a material world, and that anything that we think about it and what we characterize as spiritual requires a material basis for its existence. That people talk about mind over matter as an example coming to life. And the truth is that mind is a product of matter. You can't have a mind without matter. And what is matter? Matter is the brain, which has developed to a pretty incredible position. And so you think about something because we have a material basis for it. We have a material base. We have the brain. This matter is the product, is something that the mind is a product of matter, and not the other way around. And that's why people do things like turn off machines, life support machines, when the brain seems not to be working anymore. When the brain, matter, which is the basis, which is the foundation, which is the where mind comes from, doesn't exist anymore. So there is a relationship between mind and matter, and that relationship is that matter is primary. And the thing is, when we look at the question of materialism and spiritualism, matter is primary. And what we characterize as spiritualism or idealism is something, a reflection of matter, of the brain, how the brain interprets this matter, how it interprets and expresses things. That is matter, and the spiritual or the idealism is a reflection or response or creation of matter. So that's how that works, Comrade Life. I hope that was helpful. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Comrade Life, for your question. So let me just double check. Looks like we have taken, well, I had something that I wanted you to speak to, Chairman, and just as it relates to this chapter, but I know, and you've talked about it extensively, especially when it happened on the question of January 6th, 2021. And just, I wanted to see if you could expound or explain the situation on January 6th and the mobilization, the mass mobilization that we're seeing of white people in the US against, what appears to be against the US government. And again, as it relates to the crisis of imperialism, AKA the snail devouring its own, the snake devouring its own tail. So.
A snake and tail, snail. Yeah, we are. This is a really profound place we are in history. And unfortunately, there are people who do not have the benefit of an African internationalist investigation and analysis, don't understand it. And so many people think that there's this Trump is responsible, this is Trump stuff, and people who are following Trump. But the fact is that Trump himself was a product of a social system and in experiencing a particular kind of crisis. And that this crisis is one is deep and profound, and it impacts on how the colonizer is able to perceive himself and his relationship to the world. And you got to remember, the colonizer came into existence as a consequence of dominating the world, not being equal with it, not being part of it, but dominating the world. And it sees itself and experiences itself in its brain in that fashion, based on the material reality is everything that they have, and their existence is a product of colonialism, of rape, pillage, and the rest of it. They're supposed to dominate the world. You see that made manifest in so much of even the popular culture of a colonizer, the popular culture that would create a Superman to to fight for and protect the American way of life, and which is something that comes about and born at the process during this process of absolute hegemony of white power of the world, etc. Superheroes. This is imperialism flexing its muscle and being confident of itself, etc. But you don't see that kind of confidence. You haven't seen it for a long time now. So you might see what you see now is an imperialism that cannot see the future. And it can't see the future. And that plays out in the popular culture as well. And so as we've talked about this before, what they see is vampires and zombies. This is the future, Walking Dead, dead but not yet quite dead kind of thing. That's what they see. And then they wax nostalgia on the past of imperialist strength. That's why you see the resurgence of a Superman and a Wonder Woman and all of this phenomenon, because they can't see the future. So they fall back on a failed past, and they fall and they project a world of walking dead people. So this is how what's being experienced. And that's based on the materiality of loss that we see occurring. And this loss, you hear white people marching, you will not replace us, you will not, what the hell are they talking about? The fact is that nobody's been talking that much about replace them, but it's an insecurity that is born of the fact that everything they have relies on what they've stolen from other people. They talk about la reconquista, and every time a Mexican crosses the border, that artificially created border, it's like reconquest. It's like the Mexican people taking back the land that was stolen from them in 1948. Even the concept of Indian giving. Like somehow you're an Indian giver. If you give somebody something, you want to take it back. It presupposes that indigenous people gave them this land and territory, didn't give them nothing. And so all of this in terms of the superstructure, the ideas, philosophy of this whole social system under severe stress. And as the United States is the hegemon, where most of that has represented the strength and authority of the imperialist center for a long time, you see in the United States a concentration of this crisis, and as a result to white people who are fighting against other white people to take land. This is not the first time we've seen that. If you look at, as we made mention before, when the so-called American Revolution was an instance of white people fighting against white people to take the land and resources of the indigenous people here, to take control of the resources produced by enslaved African people here. All over the Americas, we saw similar things that's been called revolutions, where Spanish and Portuguese and English and other people and French, fought each other. The settlers being sent here to create wealth for someplace in Europe, and they say we don't take it all for ourselves. This has been a part of that ongoing struggle, and they've even rose up. They've even risen up against the mother country, as it was characterized, which was the government. The government for the white people who fought the so-called American Revolution was England, but they rose up against the government in order to take for themselves what clearly was something that they saw as beneficial to them and not wanting to share that with the British. And in this situation now, what is happening is all around the world, people taking out resources. It's meaningful that you go to a supermarket in the United States. When I was growing up, the US used to brag about how you find empty shelves and stores and things like that in Russia or some other places that didn't have the benefit of colonialism, because in Russia they weren't extracting resources from the Caribbean, from Africa, and all these other places like the other white people were doing. So they bragged, going, nah. Look at Russia versus what we have now. Look at the United States. You know, empty shelves and things like that. The audacity of Black people rising up saying we ain't taking it no more. The audacity of criticizing this arm of the state, this domestic military force called the police, pushing them out of our lives, actually fighting back against them, characterizing them as the army that they are, occupying our forces, our communities. All of this stuff is challenging the perception of white people of themselves and their relationship to the world, and it's challenging the actual material resources that's coming into the white world. And so you've got groups of white people growing exponentially. Trump was the biggest and most important expression of that consolidated it, unified this expression in a way that captivated the majority of the white people in this country. The way his declaration, and description of Africans and other peoples around the world, this is a part of a colonial mentality. This is a part of a superstructure that's born through a mode of production that relies on stealing resources from everybody else in the world. It shapes the consciousness of the colonizer and of the colonized. And so when those white people rose up following Trump and what have you, they were rising up against what they saw as political expressions in the United States that was undermining the authority of white people, that was undermining their control of the world and things like that, wouldn't let them be white, wouldn't let them be dominant forces in the world, and they moved to get rid of it. And that's not over. And because the world has changed, it's continuing to change. And there are groups of white people who, with control of nuclear weapons and everything, every kind of armed capacity that's imaginable, who are in motion now. And they are in motion in a way that challenges, it is in many instances against the government itself, and especially if you recognize a relationship between the government and the state, which is what elections are held for anyway in the United States, about who's going to control the state. And that's an election that's been dominated, promoted by the ruling class, those who control all the resources, have the money, have the resources, the corporations and what have you. They're the ones who field these people out there that they want to have, that would represent, that would control the military, the police, the courts, and all these other kinds. That's the state, and all these other institutions like education, et cetera. Who controls that? Ultimately, that's what the part of this struggle is all about. And they see themselves losing that, and they have. And so on every, they set up in the first place this so-called democratic process that was designed to make sure that only the elite, the ruling white elite, would ever be elected. And now, because the success, if you will, of the civil rights movement and things like that has allowed the intrusion of Africans and other people into that arena, into that sphere, they are moving now, that is to say, these white people, colonizers, with a well-organized plan, and in every state in this country, or most of the states in this country, to change the laws, to change the regulations, to change the ability of colonized to be elected. And they're moving to get rid of. They don't give a damn about the electoral process is set up in the first place in a rigged fashion. They want to make it more rigged than it is. They want to kick out any potential for anybody to have challenge the hegemony of white power and everything that represents in the world. I know I I talked a lot about that comment, Akile, and hopefully I did not overdo it. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Nope, absolutely not. Really appreciate that. And I will, it's about 5 minutes to close, Chairman. So we'll stop the questions from here, but just let people know that if you did ask a question and it wasn't taken today, that it will be taken in next week's study, where we'll be looking at chapter 4 of this political report. So Chairman, I want to turn it over to you for any closing remarks before we wrap it up today.
I just want to thank everybody for coming on to this discussion. And I hope that, among other things, that a couple of things are recognized. One, that it's going to take revolutionary transformation, that this is a really important time in the history of the vulnerability of the social system is really important. And that if this is, for this to happen, then we have to have a revolutionary party. They have to have a revolutionary party that is global, that is connected to all of the African and then oppressed peoples around the world to overturn this social system, that there is no peace, there is no security, there is no way that you can be partially free, that this thing has to go. And that's our responsibility. And for those people who are in the African People's Socialist Party, that if you've achieved any level of comfort, assuming that because we have this institution or that institution, that you can rest on your laurels, that the creation of the institution in and of itself was, or the committee in and of itself was the most significant thing in the world, you're wrong. What has to happen is this system has to go. And the relationship of these institutions is a relationship to a system that we are designed and have come into existence to destroy. And the fact is that we have to recognize that we are not ordinary people. We are African internationals. We are the African People's Socialist Party. We have volunteered to assume the responsibility of overturning this social system, which means that we have to deal with every contradiction that's encountered in the world. We have to anticipate them. We have to find new ways to fight. So we can't rest on our laurels. This is an incredibly important time. And this political report does as much as we can to try and help to define that and describe it so that it will energize and give direction to the party and the movement everywhere we're located in the world. So Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Akile.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, again, I just want to really salute your profound leadership. Thank you for introducing this chapter of the political report to the world. And again, we will be looking at chapter 4 next Sunday. So make sure you tune in with us. Also register for the party's third 7th Congress plenary coming up February 11th to the 14th. So it's right around the corner. Register today at apspplenary.org. We'll have another opportunity to review this political report to our third plenary of the party's 7th Congress. So again, we stated before, but make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating to paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. So we'll catch you guys next Sunday. Uhuru and Vanguard up.
Vanguard up.